The Jerusalem Post said Ginsburg called for the conquest of Lebanon and the settlement of southern Lebanon. He claimed that Lebanon was part of the land of Israel and was given to the Jewish people by God.
And so I took that moment, I took it and I said, oh, you're sorry for our losses? Are you also sorry for the bombs you created, which have been dropped on tents in Rafah and killed innocent human beings?
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to the Struggle Video News. Israel is apparently determined to set the whole Middle East on fire. It's now in the midst of a war in Lebanon. Supposedly, it has demanded that Hezbollah forces withdraw north of the Litani River. But according to the New York Times, now it's demanding Lebanese to withdraw further north, perhaps another 20 miles further north to the Awali River. Laila Motana Allen of PBS posted this map showing the places the Israeli military is demanding the Lebanese run away from. Pretty soon, the Israelis will be demanding the Lebanese run back and forth, like they demand of the Palestinians in Gaza. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed by a missile attack from Iraq. So Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has the dubious distinction of fighting Hamas in Gaza, warring in Lebanon, and now in Iraq and Iran. But the Biden-Harris administration is behind him all the way. Here's a tweet with an excuse for a mass murder. It comes from Naftali Bennett, who was Prime Minister of Israel a couple of years ago. He writes that Shiites in Lebanon have a rocket room. They are supposedly paid monthly by Hezbollah to have this area where they can shoot off rockets. Utter BS, of course, just an innovative falsehood to justify killing civilians at will. The reorganization desired by the religious Zionists, better called Kahanists, is to conquer Lebanon and to steal land outright. You know about Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. This is Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg. Ginsburg is from St. Louis, came to Israel in 1965. He's part of the Chabad movement and studied with the famed Lubavitcher Rabbi. The Jerusalem Post said Ginsburg called for the conquest of Lebanon and the settlement of southern Lebanon in a letter published on Wednesday. That would be September 23rd. He wrote, it would be justified to kill all members of Hezbollah, particularly their leadership. The Post said he claimed that Lebanon was part of the land of Israel and was given to the Jewish people by God. Further, he wrote, after the conquest and expulsion of the hostile population, a Jewish settlement must be established, thus completing the victory. This drivel is well regarded in Israel. Ginsburg is famous for writing 120 books and is an expert on mysticism, allegedly finding truths outside of science, logic, and all reason. Through this wisdom, Ginsburg notoriously defended the acts of Baruch Goldstein in 1994. That man killed 29 Muslims in Hebron while they were praying. Israeli-American professor Moti Inbari wrote, Ginsburg stated that on the theoretical level, if a Jew requires a liver transplant to survive, it would be permissible to seize a Gentile and take this liver forcefully. An article in Haaretz last year mentioned his teachings hold that it is acceptable Jewish practice to kill non-Jews so long as it is clear that they will grow up to harm us. In other words, it's acceptable to him for Jews to kill Palestinian babies. This is the venomous Kahanist whom the Jerusalem Post reports on without comment. And if you don't know about the term Kahanist, it refers to those who follow the teachings of Meir Kahane. He was a U.S. rabbi and grifter who, when he started preaching in Israel, was thought to have views similar to those of the Nazis, just with the roles of Jews and Germans reversed. We'll close this section with a drawing from Italian artist Giancarlo Costantini, showing solidarity with Beirut, which is being bombed massively while dictators and royal rubbish who rule Arab countries look the other way. The famous writer Ta-Nehisi Coates has come out with a new book, much of it devoted to Palestine. It's called The Message. I saw him on CBS Mornings being interviewed. He was questioned by Tony DeCopel, who basically asked him if he was an extremist. Coates didn't take the bait. His answers were terrific, basically laying out the apartheid that he saw on his visit there in early 2023. Be sure to see the whole interview. We link to it in the Palestine-Israel archive on thestrugglevideo.org. This QR code will get you to the right archive. MEC sponsored a panel on September 26th entitled Denouncing the Attack on Gaza, Denouncing the Attack on Lebanon. The first speaker was a Lebanese-American, Nadia Milleron. She became an activist for airline safety after her daughter Samia was killed in the Boeing airliner crash in Ethiopia. She also has great concern for innocents being killed in Gaza and has family stories to tell you about what happened in Lebanon.
We can still make a difference. And I remember how I really felt walking around Washington, D.C. after the Boeing crash. I felt that it was pointless. Like I felt that my work, the things that I was doing, going into office after office on Capitol Hill, was just a futile exercise. What was I doing? Boeing had over 100 lobbyists, and they had like staff and cars and a lot of money, and we could see them coming out with the representatives from into the hearings from behind in the rooms behind the hearing room where we weren't allowed to go. And so all of these things made me feel so hopeless about it. But I just couldn't see for my own conscience. And, you know, everybody has their own belief system. I'm Christian. I believe in God. I believe that whatever I might be obliged to do, I can't be looking at results. I just have to do it anyway. And what I was trying to do is, and this is analogous to the whole situation that we're facing now with Palestine and Lebanon, what I was trying to do is stop a third crash, because these planes were going to be put back up in the air without correcting them. And so what I was thinking is, I just have to do my best effort. And even if I fail, at least I could say, if there is a third crash, that I did my best effort, contacting the press, contacting these different congressional offices. And you know what was really surprising? We passed the act. We passed it bipartisan. We passed it unanimously. And the families actually had a much bigger impact than Boeing, even though we were just had no staff, we had no money, we just were committed. We just kept walking into people's offices and saying, we just don't want a third crash. Look at these pilot reports that are happening today. Look at them, see the defective manufacturing that is occurring. See how we have avoided a third crash narrowly by the skills of pilots, not by the equipment being better or safer, but by pilots trying to manage very unmanageable equipment. So this really is so connected to Palestine and now Lebanon in so many ways. My daughter, Samia Rose Dumo, the last message she put on her banner on her Facebook is, "Silence is complicity." And we are all complicit as taxpayers in these slaughters in Palestine, the West Bank, and Gaza, and now in Lebanon. So I just want to talk to you about some real situations. This is not. I'm not a historian. I'm not an expert on any of this. I'm just a citizen trying to be, trying to do my duty, or trying to grapple with my complicity in this, that my tax dollars are funding these terrible atrocities. So, Samia wanted me to go to Palestine and sponsor other like evangelical Christians to go. And so John Fussell, who's on this call, he knows that even though the crash happened March 10th of 2019, I was actually scheduled to go to Palestine on Tuesday, March 12th, and that I had sponsored some evangelical Christians to go on that trip, and they did go. And it's really important, bit by bit, for people to witness, what is actually happening. So when this last spring, Boeing was at a hearing on the Senate side, and Dave Calhoun, who was the CEO of Boeing at the time, was there, and he came up to me, and he had practiced this, and you could tell that he was almost acting, right? So he came up to me and he said, "I just want to tell you, I'm so sorry for your loss." And this is the time where the cameras click and the film rolls, and he's trying to get a media hit to say Boeing has admitted guilt, and they are saying they're sorry to the victims. And so I took that moment, I took it, and I said, "Oh, you're sorry for our losses? Are you also sorry for the bombs you created, which have been dropped on tents in Rafah and killed innocent human beings? You could see through the tents. You can see exactly what they're about, and they're not combatants. They're innocent human beings and children. Are you sorry for that too?" And you could see his result. He didn't know how to respond, as he just turned away, and the cameras captured that. They captured a person who was claiming to be sorry, who was creating bombs to kill innocent human beings, who was making money off of that. And then, also the month before, there were no purchases of the MAX plane that killed our daughter and 346 people. There were no purchases around the world because the plane is being continued to be produced in a defective manner. And you can see on the news all the time how even the machinist union and the Boeing employees, they don't want to stand for this. They don't want to be part of this anymore. They don't want to have the product shorted. They want to make a good product and be paid fairly to do so, and have sufficient time and effort to be able to do it in a proper way, and not produce bad planes, and not stress themselves as human beings physically in terms of labor. So the one country that bought a lot of planes that month was Israel, even though Israel lost 2 people on the MAX planes. But they bought those planes and they kind of bailed Boeing out that month. So it's like, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, right? It's all connected together. Boeing as a company that produces death in a variety of ways for their own profit and for their own short-term profit, because going down this path, is leading to long-term destruction of the company. So then going to this week, all right. So we, you know what's happened in Lebanon, but I know it from a different angle. My cousin is a surgeon at the AUB hospital, the American University of Beirut hospital, and he was there working, and the pagers were going off and they were exploding. So his pager went off, but he knew at that point not to answer it. And he just spent the whole day in the OR, in the operating room, trying to patch people back together who had been injured by that. The pagers were also going off and exploding in the American University of Beirut hospital, the American hospital. Did they say that? It did not. Doesn't make any sense at all, right? And there's absolutely no military activity. This is a very well-known hospital. I'm not saying that there's been any military activity in any Palestinian hospitals. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we're getting into an area where it is so clear and documented, and there you can make no argument that this is happening at the AUB hospital. And yet, in order to deal with that, the press simply just doesn't mention the AUB hospital. They just don't mention that that's happening. And then my family is from Zahli, which is a Christian city not so far from Damascus. It's in Lebanon, and it's about a half an hour's drive from Damascus. But it does not have any Hezbollah's presence. Couldn't argue that it does. And then my cousin is taking pictures outside of her apartment, her balcony, of bombs going off, like very, very close to her apartment, like within 200 yards of her apartment. There's bombs going off. And they're looking for airplanes to get out, and they can't find planes to get out. They have, that particular family has a daughter who has a condition where she's severely compromised mentally, and she has a routine, and she goes to school, and she has a whole way of functioning there. In order to get her on a plane, they would have to sedate her. And then if she got to Abu Dhabi or the Emirates, then what? Then what, So they're even like hesitating, not sure, kind of reluctant to leave, not sure how, to disrupt her life. Is it going to stop? Maybe it'll stop. And then, the planes have since stopped. Flights have been suspended, I hope temporarily, but now people are unable to get out. So, and they don't talk about these details at all. So again, I'm not saying that anybody else should be bombed, and there's lots of innocent people in everywhere that have been injured, but this is so starkly against their narrative of having some kind of threat or some kind of problem. And I guess, I can only think that we have to support legislative action. So we have to recognize about money flow and about money supporting Israel, and the fact that they cannot sustain this kind of death march without American funding and American weapons. And so and so my son Adnan is in Washington D.C. He's working for Code Pink. He's also working with Miko Peled, who recently came to the Palestine Museum in New Haven, but working to educate Congress, and principally to educate the young people, the young staff members that are working in Congress. And they actually have a lot of power, because they do all the writing, they do all the legislative work, and they make the recommendations for their boss, the legislators. And so we made great progress educating young people on aviation safety, and he's following that model on Palestine, Lebanon, and other U.S. Aggression in the Middle East.
You can see all the talks now at thestrugglevideo.org. Last item about Lebanon is this video of Syrian refugees in Lebanon who are streaming back to desperately and poor Idlib, Syria, because they are terrified about what Israel is doing in Lebanon. Notice they're going to Idlib. No way do they want to go back to Assad-controlled areas. A forensic study has come out about the killing of Hind Rajab and her family. Here's Congresswoman Tlaib.
And the audio on January 29th of 6-year-old Palestinian girl Hind called, as she was calling the paramedics, begging them to come rescue her after the rest of her family in the car had already been killed by the Israeli military. She kept begging, "Come get me. Please come get me. I'm so scared, please come." No one was able to reach the car for 12 days when her decomposing body was found alongside the bodies of 5 of her family members. The bodies of 2 Palestinian Red Crescent Society workers, missing since the day of her call when they were dispatched to rescue her, were discovered in the ambulance just feet away. And Madam Speaker, I'm here to talk about it because a new forensic analysis found that the Israeli military fired not 1, not 2, not a dozen, not 20, 355 tank bullets at the car that Hind was in. And the tank was so close that the Israeli soldiers would have had a clear view of Hind in the car. 6 months later, the State Department and President Biden has yet to hold the Israeli government accountable for these executions. So, Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to submit into the congressional record a forensic report.
Without objection.
Have been given the Right Livelihood Award. It's sometimes called the Alternative Nobel Peace Prize. In some ways, it's better because we haven't heard about any of their laureates who have gone on to commit war crimes. The Nobel Committee can't say the same. We interviewed Amro some months ago about how hard it was to organize in Hebron against the Israeli violence and land theft. You can see it in our older video page on thestrugglevideo.org. In 2023, the Middle East Crisis Committee gave its Courage Award to Alaa Abdel Fattah, an Egyptian-British citizen who has been in an Egyptian prison for most of the last decade. He's been held on a series of crimes, most of which aren't even crimes in a country that values human rights. He was last sentenced to 5 years in prison and was due to be out September 29th of this year. But the Sisi dictatorship, which is a great ally of both Trump and Biden, refuses to let him go. The Censorship Index writes, Alaa is a British citizen, and it is urgent that the UK government intervene now to stop this new violation of his human rights. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has spoken up for Alaa in the past, but he now must turn those words into action. Laila Suif, Abdel Fattah's mother, wrote today via the Free Alaa campaign that she is now going on a hunger strike, demanding his freedom. In Allah's honor, we purchased a number of Allah's book, You Have Not Yet Been Defeated. Allah writes not only about Egypt, but about Palestine. He doesn't just relate one fact after another. He is very eloquent. There's an introduction in the book by Naomi Klein. We've been giving away Allah's book free to libraries. If your local library would like to have a copy, write to us at mail@thestruggle.org. Hurricane Helene is now rated to be one of the most destructive hurricanes to ever hit the U.S. mainland. Helene and other storms in the southeast in 1 week dropped 40 trillion gallons of water. Northwest North Carolina was supposed to be a climate safe haven. After all, it's 400 miles away from the coast. But look at Asheville. Asheville, North Carolina was wrecked. The notion of climate safe havens is a fantasy. As Brian Tokar told us in his lecture in Connecticut last month, scientists now are getting better at seeing the climate causes directly behind specific weather disasters. So for Helene, a report from the Lawrence Berkeley Lab in California suggested that the influence of warming due to climate change created 50% more rain over parts of Georgia and the Carolinas than otherwise would have been expected. With all the billions being sent on incentives to spur so-called green energy, attempts to cut back fossil fuel use or energy use in general are not succeeding. For instance, we now have crypto, which is an immense energy hog, now being joined by AI. OpenAI's ChatGPT appeared on the scene just a year ago and now has 100 million users. The New York Times talked about a study about the electricity that will be used by new AI servers in a couple of years. It said it would be as much as Argentina, the Netherlands. The New York Times talked about a study about the electricity that will be used by new AI servers in a couple of years. It said it would be as much as Argentina, the Netherlands, and Sweden each use in a year. Was it a good idea to allow the birth of crypto or AI? It makes money for the big companies and the billionaires, so evidently it's a fine idea. The great God of capitalism will not be denied. That God can't be bothered with thinking about climates that have nurtured humanity for thousands of years.